My name is Evelyn. I'm 34 years old and work as a graphic designer. My life used to be busy but manageable, balancing work, family, and everything in between. But recently, things have changed and not for the better. My husband, Alan, started acting in ways I couldn't understand. Little things kept piling up, and I felt like my life was spinning out of control. It all started when Alan came home one evening and said something that shocked me. "Evelyn," he said, trying to sound calm but serious, "my mom will be moving in with us next month. We'll need to clear out the guest room for her." I stood there, stunned. My mind raced. His mom, Marjorie, wasn't easy to live with. She was always critical and made me feel small. Trying to stay calm, I asked, "Is everything okay with her? Why does she need to move in?" "She's having some health issues," Alan replied. "It'll be easier to take care of her if she's here." His answer seemed reasonable, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. Living with Marjorie meant endless judgment and stress. I forced a small smile. "All right," I said softly. "I'll start getting the room ready." But I knew it wasn't just about cleaning a room. This would change everything. Over the next few days, I began making preparations. But I wasn't just clearing out the guest room. I was also preparing myself emotionally. I had to find a way to handle what was coming. Alan, completely unaware of my anxiety, seemed excited. He kept talking about how it was the right thing to do and how it would bring the family closer. But every time he brought it up, I felt more trapped. One evening, as I sat in the living room after tidying up, my phone buzzed. It was Alan. "Hey," he said sharply. "Why isn't the guest room ready yet?" "I've been busy with work," I replied, trying to stay calm. "I'll finish it this weekend." "You need to make this a priority, Evelyn," he snapped. "It's important." I clenched my fists but stayed silent. Arguing wouldn't help. Instead, I decided to act. Quietly, I started making a backup plan. Over the next few days, I rented a small apartment across town. It wasn't fancy, but it was a place I could escape to if things got too hard. I stocked it with the basics and made sure it was ready for me and our daughter Lily, if we ever needed it. When the day came for Marjorie to move in, Alan took the day off to pick her up. "I'll handle everything," he said. "Just make sure the house is ready." I nodded and went through the motions, pretending to be the supportive wife. Once he left, I finalized my plans. I packed a small bag for myself and one for Lily, hiding them in the closet. My heart pounded as I worked. Was I doing the right thing, or was this too much? That evening, Alan and Marjorie came home. She looked around the house with sharp eyes. "Well, it's small," she said with a smirk. "But I suppose it will do." I bit my tongue and forced a polite smile. "Welcome, Marjorie. I hope you'll be comfortable here." The first few weeks were as hard as I feared. Marjorie criticized everything, how I cooked, cleaned, and even how I folded laundry. Alan, meanwhile, acted like nothing was wrong. "She's just adjusting," he'd say when I tried to talk to him. One night, while I was making dinner, Marjorie cornered me in the kitchen. "You know," she said in a low voice, "Alan deserves a wife who puts family first. You're too focused on your work. It's shameful." I stared at her, too stunned to reply. Before I could say anything, Alan walked in. "What's going on?" he asked, looking at both of us. "Nothing," Marjorie said quickly, smiling sweetly. "We were just talking." Alan looked at me, waiting for me to agree. I sighed and said, "Dinner's almost ready." That night, as I lay in bed, I realized I couldn't do this anymore. Something had to change. The next morning, after dropping Lily off at school, I drove to the apartment I'd rented. It was time to prepare for the next step. When I returned home that evening, Alan was waiting for me in the living room with Marjorie. "We need to talk," he said, his tone cold. I sat down, bracing myself. "What is it?" "Marjorie feels you're not trying hard enough to make her feel welcome," Alan said. "She's right. You need to step up." I stared at him in disbelief. "Alan, I've done everything I can. I've cooked, cleaned, and gone out of my way to make her comfortable. What more do you want?" "It's not enough," Marjorie chimed in, her voice smug. "You're not dedicated." Something inside me snapped. I stood up and said, "You're right. I'm not the perfect daughter-in-law, and I never will be. But I won't let myself be treated like this anymore." Alan looked shocked. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm done," I replied. "I've tried, but nothing I do will ever be good enough for you or your mother." Without another word, I went to the closet, grabbed the bags I'd packed, and headed for the door. Alan followed me, his voice rising. "Evelyn, what are you doing?" I turned to face him. "I'm leaving, Alan. Lily and I will be staying somewhere else." Marjorie's voice rang out from behind him. "You can't just leave." "Watch me," I said, opening the door and stepping outside. The next few days were a blur. Alan called nonstop, leaving angry messages, but I didn't answer. I focused on settling into the new apartment with Lily. It wasn't easy, but for the first time in weeks, I felt free. One evening, Alan texted me, "You're making a mistake. Come home." I stared at the message, my resolve strengthening. "No," I whispered. "I'm finally doing what's right for us." Weeks passed, and Lily and I began to adjust to our new life. The apartment became our safe place. I started to focus on my work again, pouring energy into projects I loved and finally feeling like myself again. But one evening, as I returned home from work, I noticed Alan's car parked outside. My heart sank. What was he doing here? He was standing by the entrance, looking upset. "Evelyn," he called as I approached, "we need to talk." I stopped a few feet away, my guard up. "There's nothing to talk about, Alan. I've made my decision." "You're being selfish," he said, stepping closer. "You've broken up our family. Lily deserves better." "Maybe," I replied, meeting his gaze. "But for once, I'm putting myself and Lily first." Alan looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. Instead, he sighed and stepped back. "You'll regret this," he said quietly before walking away. That night, I lay awake, replaying the encounter in my mind. I felt a twinge of guilt, but pushed it aside. I had made my choice, and it was the right one. A few weeks later, I got an email from Alan. It was long and full of apologies. He said he understood now how hard things had been for me, and that he wanted to make amends. He asked if we could meet to talk things through. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to believe he had changed, but another part of me was wary. People don't change overnight, and I wasn't ready to let my guard down. I wrote back a short reply. "I need time. Please respect that." For the next few months, Alan kept reaching out. He sent messages and even small gifts for Lily. I appreciated the effort, but I wasn't ready to let him back into our lives. In the meantime, I focused on building a new routine for Lily and me. We spent weekends exploring the city, visiting museums, and trying out new restaurants. I found joy in the small things again, and Lily thrived in the new environment. One day, while we were at the park, Lily asked, "Mom, do you think Dad will ever come back?" I looked at her, unsure of how to answer. "I don't know, sweetie," I said honestly. "But what I do know is that we're going to be okay, no matter what." She smiled and hugged me tightly. In that moment, I knew I had made the right decision. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and we were finally free